Hello, hello! It is me, Legendary, and I'm back with another Yap video. Today I'm going to explore the possibilities of what we could expect from the Foxhole Airborne update. Specifically, I'm going to be diving into the mechanics that we could potentially experience once the update releases in the summer update, which is about 3 or 4 months from now. So far, the devs have not shown us all the cards in what to expect with the Airborne update, so the only information that we can really bank from at this point in time is what was revealed in the trailer. Now, do keep in mind that the Airborne trailer did have some pre-generated graphics to sort of hype up the cinematic aspect of the Airborne update. Now, I firmly believe that even though it has some pre-generated CGI, I think that a lot of those scenes will translate to some gameplay experience that we can expect. So for this video, what I want to do is go through what we know from that trailer and then make an educated prediction on what we can expect some aspects of that gameplay to look like. Now, just to cut short on me talking for 3 hours straight, I'm only going to dial in on one aspect for this video. And then if this is content that people enjoy, then I will make another video where I'll explore some of the other aspects that I've been cooking up, just so that I can sort of see if I'm somewhere in the ballpark in what the Siege Camp devs have in mind for the Airborne update. All right. So let's first dive into the trailer video and break down some of the key things that we know and will be in the Airborne update so that we can make a decent prediction on one of these mechanics. So first and foremost, let's take a look at the aircraft themselves. So we know that all the aircraft is going to be player controlled. This is in line with almost all the other aspects of Foxhole. So we're not going to have aircraft that sit in a hangar somewhere and then we sort of call it in as an airstrike from the ground level. If we wanted to move munition from an airbase into the enemy's faces, we would need to load that munition into an aircraft, get a pilot in that aircraft, and then fly to a location and then hopefully bomb it to death. We also know from the very first still that initially the Wardens are going to have a fixed wing fighter aircraft, and it looks like the Colonials will have access to two large aircraft. The first one that we also saw was a Colonial heavy bomber, dropping some nice looking explosives on top of a Warden tank line. Now, one thing to keep in mind from this as well is we can also ascertain that from the bombing run sort of scene here, we will definitely have some form of in-hex bombing or strike from a top-down aircraft perspective. So in the initial release, I predict that we are most likely going to have to take aircraft to a specific location to drop bombs on it. Now, that sounds intuitive and straightforward, but there have been some speculations that the aircraft will be out of reach of the players on the ground. And how that translates, we'll have to see at a later stage or maybe in another video, because I'm going to be dialing on a specific interaction for this video. All right, let's continue on. And let's just take a look at a couple of other things that we know for a fact. Dogfighting is probably going to play a very important part in the Airborne update. I think the primary way that aircraft will be counterattacked will be with other aircraft. And we have seen this notion with the naval update for the last year and a half. The best way to counter a large ship that is doing coastal bombardment is with another large ship. Yes, you can swarm it with smaller vessels, or you can counterattack a little bit with ground-based artillery. But for the most part, the most effective way to counter large naval ships is with other large naval ships, whether it be submarines or frigates or battleships. I believe this pattern is going to hold true with the air update as well. If your base is going to be struck by bombers, yes, you could probably do some counter damage with ground-based anti-aircraft guns, but the main way that you can prevent that damage or to have an effective countermeasure will have to be deploying your own aircraft in response. And this is going to hold true for both factions. I don't think that we're going to have pure asymmetry in one faction only having fighters and one faction only having bombers. But knowing Siege Camp's release history, they might only release one for the one faction and one for the other on the first sort of update that we get once the Airborne update drops. But eventually that will balance out, and both factions will probably have a bomber, and both factions will probably have a fighter as well. One important thing to note from this still over here is it looks like there is some form of stratosphere or some form of sky map that this is taking place in. Notably, there is very few, if no, ground-based counterattack happening in this scene in the trailer. So this means that there will be some level of separation from aircraft going from one point on the map to the other, and the only way to intercept that attack would have to be from other aircraft. So this is where I think there will be some form of stratosphere layer within the game world. So we could probably expect some level of travel between the ground areas where all the bombing runs are going to take place and some air travel region. And that's sort of the main thing that I'm going to be focusing in for this video. Additionally, just to round things off, we also know that the aircraft is primarily moved by train. These particular flatbeds look like large flatbeds, so they are similar to the ones that battle tanks use. So when you package a battle tank, they tend to have this sort of shape or large shape object that holds them, or large platform that holds them. So if you want to move aircraft between different regions using ground-based vehicles, I predict that you will have to use a train network to do so. So there will be a lot of integration with the existing facility systems within Foxhole. So we can presume that constructing, fielding, and using aircraft is going to rely heavily on the use of facilities. So if you haven't yet, get used to collecting coal, get used to collecting sulfur, get used to refining processed construction materials and things like that, because most likely aircraft is going to be tied to those systems. The entry-level vehicles that we had for the naval update was still gunboats. You can, go to a shipyard and use refined materials to hammer out a gunboat to have some naval fun. I do not think we're going to have that level entry into aircraft. The entry-level aircraft is going to require facility gameplay. What degree of facility gameplay, I don't fully know yet. But again, that will be a prediction that I'll make in a different video. Right. Then we also know that there's going to be paratroopers. This is the second colonial aircraft that was shown. It looked like some form of, troop carrier of some kind, probably do some logistics drops, but all we know is there will be a method for troops to leave the sort of stratosphere layer of some kind and drop into a hex region to do some ground-based assaults. And then finally, on the very last scene, we also saw that in-hex fighting will involve at least 2 axes of movement. So when you're in something like a small aircraft like this, you can sort of tilt and adjust your yaw on the aircraft itself. So there will be some level of maneuverability. So maybe things like there will probably be some aspects like dodging flak attacks or dodging ground to air counterattacks. So the maneuverability of your aircraft is going to play an important factor in the net result in what you're trying to achieve. Obviously, if you're a bomber, you were going to try and destroy your target, and if you're a fighter, you're probably going to do things like strafing runs and avoid low-level flak to, keep your aircraft intact afterwards. All right. So, in summary, just for this initial video, we know that players are going to be moving aircraft from A to B. Aircraft will be operating inside of a hex. So if you want to bomb something, you need to go into that hex and be susceptible to counterattack from local defenses. And there will definitely be some aspect of air-to-air combat. And that will probably be taking place high above the ground, isolated from other forms of attack. At least that's what I sort of see from the initial trailer video. Now, my main prediction for this video is going to revolve around this Stratosphere or air-only battlefield. So that's what I'm going to be dialing in for here, and I do believe that that is going to play an important factor in how you're going to be fielding your aircraft and how they can strike certain regions and have an impact on the outcome of certain battles or the destruction of certain strategic locations within the Foxhole game world. And then finally, we also know that aircraft will require facilities just on the onset of that large train holding pad that is keeping that fighter on top of it. That just screams to me that you're gonna have to build a large facility to facilitate the production of these aircraft. You're not going to be hammering them out in a garage. That's just not feasible. I don't think that's going to happen. And then paratroopers will be a thing, and in-hex fighting will also have an impact based on the type of aircraft that you have, whether it be a nimble fighter or a heavy bomber with probably a decent amount of armor or health that would have to be taken out before it is brought down to the ground. So for this video, I'm going to be dialing in on border mechanics, because I think that's the main burning question that people have been asking, and this has been the major discussion point both on various discords that I'm part of, but also on Reddit, and sometimes in-game world chat also is figuring out exactly, how do we get an aircraft from A to B? We're not going to build or field aircraft from one part of the hex into or locally inside the hex that we're in. I do think that there will be a way for you to strike a target in an adjacent hex, and that's the sort of main mechanic that I'm trying to figure out for this video. So how exactly will an aircraft go from A to B? Well, before we can sort of figure out a mechanic for this, let's just be absolutely clear on how current border travel mechanics work. So here's a conventional border logic scenario. So here, let's say that you are playing in a tank and you want to cross into another region to attack into it. How does that currently work in the game? Well, as we all know, you are inside your tank. Your tank has multiple crew members inside of it, maybe 3 or 4 or just 2 members inside the vehicle itself. And if you want to travel to another region, you literally drive the tank to the edge of the map where the map is connected to another region. You press E and then you get a prompt to cross into that hex itself. Now, if the region that you're going into is very busy, or it has lots of players in it, or there's an ongoing attack of some kind, then you will need to wait for a space. Now, this can go anywhere from waiting for 5 or 6 minutes up to 3 or 4 hours. And I've been in scenarios where border queues are crazy and you just simply can't skip the queue and you just have to wait it out. And if you want to play in your tank, you just have to wait until there is enough space on your side of the player queue that facilitates your tank being able to teleport across, and then you get to play. So this is a mechanic that I'm fairly sure all Foxhole veterans are familiar with, and being in control of these border mechanics is also something a lot of players have delved right into. If you don't know about that, go check out my video on how zoos and invasion bonuses work. I do cover those mechanics briefly there as well. So if you're interested in figuring out how those border mechanics work, go and check it out. But regardless, this is the main way that you travel from one region into another. And this particular mechanic is further exemplified by the use of large ships. So when a large ship wants to move into a naval hex, or from one hex with water into another, it gets a little bit more complicated because you have a lot of operating staff on that vessel itself. So for those of you who haven't been in a large ship before, you move the large ship into the border crossing just like you would do a tank. Then you press E, and then what will happen is the server will take 60 seconds to reserve all the different crew members on that ship a spot into the adjacent region's border queue. Once that has been reserved, the ship will move across and everyone on the ship will be teleported with it. However, in reality, if you've been on a large ship before, this doesn't always translate exactly. And more often than not, this is a scene that you get to see when there is a large-scale naval battle happening and you need to move your ship into a region to help attack. You get to the border, you press E, you wait the 60 seconds, and the game just tells you, sorry, there's too many players on the other side. And the only recourse that you have is to throw some people overboard, then cross, and hopefully they get to swim to the other side and rejoin your crew and not get obliterated by an initial alpha strike. So this is something that is a cause for concern, and this is the main thing that people have been talking about when the Air update video released. Because we have to ask the burning question now of, how the hell are aircraft going to cross? So what happens if you're in an aircraft and you slam into the border edge, hilariously, because, you know, you're in a fixed wing aircraft. It's not like you can go full hover. How will you get into a combat zone that's quite complicated? Now, laughably, I don't think this is going to be a thing at all. The image is really funny of your head of, you know, you're inside this propeller plane and you get to the edge of the border and you press E and it says, sorry, there's a queue, you're going to have to wait. I don't think we're going to see something like this, you know, really funny mid-VTOL aircraft hovering at the edge of the border and people having to jump out the aircraft to ease up some of the border queue locations like you would do in a large ship in the current naval update. So I don't think this is going to be a thing. I don't think we're going to be seeing aircraft hanging midair or slamming themselves into the border and then waiting for the queue to cross in. So instead, I think this is where the first sort of prediction comes into play. I do think that the devs are cooking something with how region traveling works. Now, I don't think we're going to see a change in the ground-based gameplay. I know a lot of people have been saying, oh, this is something that they're going to draw inspiration from their other project, which is Anvil Empires. And in Anvil Empires, there's no regions per se, it's just one continuous world. I don't think we're quite going to have that mechanic for ground-based combat. I think we're too ingrained and there's too much weapon balance that involves the border mechanics and how they work. But instead, I think we're going to get a completely new region within Foxhole. However, I think that region is going to be above all the other regions in the game. And this is where I think we're going to get a Stratosphere region, because historically, aircraft have normally traveled in the Stratosphere to avoid low-level or low-surface flak attacks or counterattacks. So, if you are in an aircraft and you want to go from region A to region B, instead of conventional logic of flying your aircraft into the border wall and then pressing E to get to the other side and then, run into some level of problems with region queues, I think there will be a large region above the conventional region that you need to fly your aircraft into, travel into the stratosphere region above the map, and then you move your aircraft's relative position to that other region, and then you have to descend down into that region and deploy into like a sub-region that you can then follow on with your usual attack. So conventional logic still applies with all the other assets that we have in game. So infantry, tanks, ships, logi trucks, etc. You go to the region, edge, teleport across. That's not going to change. But if you want to move an aircraft across, you're going to have to fly up and cross into the stratosphere region, then fly over the region you want to go into, and then descend back down. All right. So let's take a look at an example here. So here I have a sort of generated world state that I've made an illustration of. And we're going to go with the example of a colonial aircraft or a colonial bomber that wants to strike Ulster Falls from some airbase that is created in Liberation Point. So how will that aircraft go from their starting airport to the target to go and throw some bombs on it to, help push the front or something like that? Well, let's take a look at sort of a 3D aspect of how this particular system will work. So here, I've basically just taken the 2D aspect and put it on an isometric plane. And for your aircraft to travel into the Linn of Mercy from the Deadlands region, you would need to go to the stratosphere layer like so. So the stratosphere layer sits above all the other regions' Z-plane, and your aircraft would have to sort of ascend into it so that it could then do the border travel as expected. So the first thing you do is you literally just fly your aircraft up. How that mechanic is going to work, I'm not entirely sure, but I predict that there will be a bounding box near the top of the region that you simply just fly up to. You have to sort of gain lift and get all the way up, and then you press E, and then you border cross into this stratosphere region. Now, once you're in the stratosphere region, crossing to your target location is seamless. So there's not going to be a border between the sort of airspace above Deadlands and the airspace between Linn of Mercy. It's just going to be one large region that you can travel to. Then you need to position your aircraft above the region that you want to go to bomb. And then there will be an aspect of you having to descend your aircraft one more time. So I think that's the main way that we're going to get aircraft from A to B. And once you get to the sub-region or the region that you want to get into, then you can go and strike your target just like we saw in the trailer, where you literally fly the aircraft some distance above the ground on a low-level strike. You drop your payload, it does some explosions, and this will also be where ground-based defense crews can take shots at you. So when you're in the stratosphere layer, you're a little bit more safe, but when you're on the ground or within proximity to the ground, you will be vulnerable to ground-based anti-aircraft fire. Again, what those weapons are and what they're going to look like, I'll cover in another video. Right. So how will the stratosphere region work? So I've kind of shown a small illustration of one neighboring region attacking another, but on a grand scale, how exactly will this look like? Well, the traditional world map, I believe, isn't going to change much at all. Unlike the naval update, where the devs added a lot of sub-regions on the side of the map to accommodate large swaths of bodies of water so that large ships can maneuver in a fleet sort of pattern and just allow for more naval-based shenanigans. I don't think we're going to have this level of increased land space within the game itself. Yes, we're probably going to have a couple of regions reworked to allow for the deployment of airstrips or airfields or something like that. We've already seen the devs sort of cook a few things up by introducing the new large ship in the Slyken Shelf subregion. But I don't think the main world map is going to change much. Maybe just a few tweaks here or there to the existing terrain to facilitate larger facility construction. We'll talk about that in another video. But for the Stratosphere region, I think it's just going to be one really large region that will encompass the entire world map. And the reason why I think it's going to be one region is, unlike the other regions within Foxhole that can get very cluttered with the construction of bunker bases, facilities, and just the overall addition of game entities within the game itself. For example, water puddles, snowstorm effects, craters, decaying structures, husked trenches and things like that. And of course a lot of player assets, so infantry and tanks having to exist within the game world. I think the devs need to segment all those assets up to prevent, a server overload and the server hamster constantly dying. Now, that does happen in game. It still happens even though things are segmented. But in a Stratosphere region, I don't think there's going to be that many assets that is going to be loaded into the game world itself. Realistically, it's going to be, sky. There might be some clouds. There might be some weather effect clouds. So, you have to watch out for strong winds and things like that. But for the most part, we're not loading in individual bullets being fired. We're not loading in artillery shells going off. We're not loading in border bases and bunker bases and town-ass bases and simulated water or anything like that. So for the most part, I think one large region should be quite stable for the devs to get it to work. The only thing realistically that's going to be in this region is going to be aircraft and weather effects. That's it. So being able to maneuver all your aircraft into one large region, I think will be very possible. And additionally, you could also have the traditional region mechanics work within the Stratosphere layer. Like, in-region communication between aircraft and things like that. But having one region does now introduce a conundrum. Would it be possible to strike, a base very, very far away from a relatively safe location? So in this example, is it possible for us to strike the reaching trail from an airbase that's situated in Akrithia? And mechanically, I do think it is possible. But you're going to have some hurdles that get in the way. The main and obvious one that I can think of is aircraft needs fuel. So the operating limits of aircraft will also depend on the size of that aircraft itself. If you're loading a heavy bomber and you have a certain fuel capacity and a certain payload, you will have an effective range that this bomber will be able to operate in. And conversely, if you're in a nimble aircraft or a QRF aircraft like a fighter to take down bombers, you'll also have a relatively short operating range. And those particular numbers will definitely vary from the different aircrafts and the different factions that use them. But for the most part, since everything is still in one region, if you have enough range and you balance the aircraft itself and definitely play around with the different weight mechanics that the devs have been playing around with in the last couple of updates, I do think it's possible that you could have relatively extended ranges to strike certain targets. Now, you might also have things like kamikaze runs, where you load your bombers with a certain amount of payloads, and then you fly to a location just to bomb it to death, and then you don't bring those bombers back because they won't have the fuel to make the return run. I think some tactics like that will be possible, but that will all be player decision based. But to go back to the previous question, is it possible mechanically from a gameplay point of view to go from one region to another using the entire stratosphere layer to sort of go from A to B? I think it will be possible, but definitely you will have to do some balancing of fuel and your payloads and figuring out what your effective range is going to be. And I'm fairly sure the devs are going to love watching us squirm and figure out how those particular numbers are going to come into effect. So that's the first hurdle that's the first hurdle that we will need to overcome, is fuel management and balancing payloads. The other thing that we're going to have to take heed of is weather conditions. Remember the weather station? Yeah, it's almost been out for almost a year now, and I shudder to think that the devs released the weather station just to counter a meme that the community has going, where we always predictively say, the only reason why the opposing faction is winning is because the devs have changed the air or weather or wind condition to make it more appeasing for that faction. I highly doubt that the devs added the weather station in just to to defy or to counter-prove that running joke. I do think that there's a bigger picture that the weather stations are going to have to come into play. And I think knowing what regions or what stratosphere layers is inaccessible due to weather conditions is going to be very important. So if you are a bunker-based builder and weather is going to be an important factor into making aircraft functional, I highly recommend that you go and start adding in weather stations to your bunker-based designs. Specifically, you're going to need multiple weather stations inside every single ground-based region so that you can make a weather network. I do hope that the devs explain how weather is going to affect aircraft, and specifically how they were going to affect border travel, or whether or not your airplane is able to actually fly in these different sort of hotspots. And a better explanation of the weather station mechanic and how we can predictively use it, because right now it's very, very complicated to get a result that is quite minimal in the actual outcome of the war. But yes, I do think weather is going to be important. We have to get used to the fact that wind conditions and whether it's snowing or raining or etc. plays into the operating range of the aircraft itself, or whether or not the aircraft can even take off into the stratosphere will play an important part, and weather stations are going to be the tool that we're going to have to use to figure that out. Right. And then finally, and most importantly, I do think that the stratosphere layer is where QRF is mainly going to be happening. So even though the game is going to play out in Hex, the result of air combat is going to play out in Hex, whether or not a bomber hits a target or the fighters destroy it before anything happening, I think the main dogfighting mechanic is going to take place in the stratosphere region. So there will be an opportunity for people to only exist inside of their fighter aircraft, sitting in the stratosphere layer, patrolling in squadrons, hunting down bombers that were looking to strike certain targets from certain air bases. So, partisans on the ground, you are going to have a field day in the Airborne update, because it's going to be your job to spot aircraft going from the ground base into the stratosphere region so that you can call for QRF on your local airmen QRF teams. So I think the main dogfighting is going to happen there. Of course, You will still also be able to fight in Hex with your aircraft, but definitely World of Warplanes is going to take place in the Stratosphere region. So having enough coverage with multiple air bases on the ground in multiple controlled subregions is going to play a factor in how the Stratosphere region is going to result in the outcome of bombing runs and counterattacks, etc. Now, there might be additional aspects that I haven't thought of, like automated anti-aircraft guns, kind of like naval guns, or bunker-based howitzers or something like that shoot up. Whether or not we know exactly how that's going to work, I can't really tell just now. I'll look into the ground-to-air based capabilities in another video. But for now, to keep things simple, dogfighting definitely will be a thing. Having the intel in whether or not bombers are going to the stratosphere layer so that QRF fighters get to get deployed will definitely factor in the overall winners for dogfighting specifically. All right, so I think interception QRF is going to be a thing, and this is going to be the main region that it's going to take place in. The whole region above the surface level. All right, and then finally, as I alluded to a little bit earlier, I also think that in-region dogfighting will also be possible, and this is based on the fact that we saw the 2 axes of freedom that the aircraft had in, at least 2 axes of freedom that the aircraft had in the trailer video. So being able to pitch up and down and to yaw left and right. Important part to see that if a bomber makes it into a subregion, you're not completely screwed. You can still deploy local aircraft. They just won't go to the stratosphere layer, or they will come from the stratosphere region into your hex to QRF and fight. Right. One other thing I forgot to mention in slides is cloud cover will probably play a factor in this as well. Again, this ties to the weather system. There might be certain subregions not being able to navigate down into, and being able to map where and when to descend into certain subregions might play a factor in the different cloud cover systems that might be added into the game as well. I haven't completely fleshed out exactly how planes will navigate from the stratosphere layer back down to the ground. If you have any ideas how that might mechanically work, leave a comment in the YouTube section, and I'll see if anyone else has a good idea how that might exactly work. But for the most part, this is how I think aircraft will move from one airbase to a target that they can strike, and how that the counterplay will take place is this sort of interception mechanic. All right, so that's it for now. Trying to not unload all my thoughts into one video, maybe break this up into a series, do more predictions on what DevMan is cooking with the air update. I am very excited to see how everything is going to work and play out. The open dev branch that will hopefully release later in the year can't come sooner. I can't wait to test out all the different bugs that that initial version of Foxhole will have. So hopefully we get more information soon, and I can do another update later on to see whether or not I'm within the ballpark that the devs have for the future of air combat within Foxhole itself. All right, this is not the end to this video series. I'm going to be talking about things like airstrips, how that's mechanically going to work, facility building, bunker base building, etc. I have a very interesting theory about how the actual aircraft is going to be built. I know everyone loves farming and refining rare alloys to construct ships and super heavy weaponry. I think aircraft's going to be worse. I think we're going to have to do way more facility LARPing to get our precious bombers and aircraft into the air. So look forward to that. probably cause some upheaval with that one, but I do think that facility gameplay is going to have to change a bit. And rare sulfur is coming. Prepare yourselves. And then I also have some ideas of how anti-aircraft guns are going to work. Are we going to see anti-aircraft tanks? Are we going to see, large anti-AA guns strapped to the back of flatbeds, like quad cannons from Command & Conquer General style? And then finally, airdrops is going to be interesting because we did see paratroopers, but I think it might be possible that, we could drop like containers of air goods down onto the ground. So will there be an update to logistics-based gameplay? Maybe we don't need to build sprawling train track networks everywhere. Instead, we can just, use a bomber to drop a series of shipping containers from A to B. That is something that I'm going to explore as well. But again, for a future video. All right, and then finally, just a special thanks to the guys from WL in January when we were all kind of like playing through the current war that was going on. We all got together and we all had a bit of a powwow in the Discord chat. And here, literally dated the 26th of January, we sort of had this initial hashing out how this might work. And everyone gave some input on, how the different aircraft mechanics are going to work. And we had a nice discussion about weather conditions and more tools being available, like tripod deployable barometers, and how border traveling will work, and whether or not weather stations are going to work like intel centers and things like that. And again, I've refined a lot of those ideas for this video. So again, just thanks to everyone who gave input on that. Okay, but that's it from me. Again, thanks so much for listening into the yay old hour-long yap. Again, if you have any thoughts, if you have some counterpoints to my idea, feel free to leave it in the YouTube comment section. I will read through it. Feel free to drop your ideas in any of the Discords that I'm on. I am on FOD, and I'm also on the WL internal Discord. I'm also on Robert's Discord. Just feel free to drop me a message. If you have some cool ideas, if you have some cool predictions, I'll make a cool illustration of it. I'll yap about it, and I'll give some counterpoints. If I think that some people have a better idea cooking than me. All right, that's it for me. Again, I'll see you all in the next video. Expect more predictions for the air update because I'm very excited and I think everyone is ready to take to the skies and drop some bombs on the enemy.